Everybody, we have reached the end of Luke chapter 2, and in today's reading, you'll have noticed that we jumped forward in time from Jesus' infancy to his pre-teen years. Luke chapter 2, verses 41 to 52 present Jesus as a 12-year-old journeying from Nazareth to the temple in Jerusalem for the Passover festival. The gist of the story is that after celebrating the Passover, Mary and Joseph head back home with friends and relatives, and at the end of the day, they discover that Jesus is not with them. They realize that he must have stayed behind in Jerusalem. And his parents search everywhere and eventually find him in the temple, listening to and engaging with the religious teachers there. Mary sort of chastises Jesus, asking him, "Why have you treated us like this? We have been searching anxiously for you." And Jesus replies, "Why have you been searching? Didn't you know I had to be in my Father's house?" And then Jesus goes back home with them, and the section concludes with the line, "Jesus grew in wisdom and stature and in favor with God and man." Now, there's a lot to unpack here, so let's dive right in. First, it's interesting to note that Luke's introduction to the story of Jesus both starts and ends at the temple. Luke 1 begins with Gabriel appearing to Zechariah, John's dad, in the temple, and in the end of chapter 2 concludes this part of the story and ends with Jesus at the temple. The temple, we must remember, was the centerpiece of the Jewish faith, where God was thought to reside. So it's no wonder that God's story in Jesus starts here at the central location of it all. But as we read through Luke and then its sequel, the book of Acts, the story expands increasingly outward to the rest of the world. It is as if God's presence now resides not in the temple in Israel, but in Jesus and his followers as they spread the good news to the rest of the world. The second point of note here is how this little section takes us back to what just came before. We find both the Jewish teachers, the crowd, and Mary and Joseph amazed and perplexed at Jesus. The teachers are amazed at Jesus' insight. Mary both treasures this event in her heart, but doesn't fully understand what Jesus is doing. This should draw our attention back to both Mary and Elizabeth's songs and Simeon's words just a few verses earlier. In those passages, we see Jesus described as someone who is going to both astound people and confuse people or divide people. Simeon says to Mary that Jesus is going to be a sword that pierces your own heart too. And this is exactly what we see happening here. Mary is both perturbed and moved by Jesus' words and actions. This is a constant theme throughout Luke's gospel. When people encounter Jesus, how will they respond? How will you respond? Will you write him off? Will you ignore him? Will you get confused by him? Or will you respond with amazement, wonder, and trust? Luke is telling this story and framing it this way so that you, the reader, must also answer this question. Luke wants to put you into the story and wants you to wrestle with this same question, that as you encounter Jesus, how will you respond? Amazement or perplexity? Third, this story contains Jesus' first ever recorded words. We don't hear him talking in the nativity stories for obvious reasons, and we get a lot of his words recording during his adult ministry, but these are the only words that he speaks that we have recorded before the age of 30, and it's incredibly insightful into who Jesus is. He turns to Mary and Joseph and says, "Why are you searching for me? Didn't you know I had to be in my Father's house?" This assumes that Mary and Joseph should have known where Jesus was going to be, but they didn't. Luke tells us they didn't understand. But Jesus is pretty clear where he is and why. And one scholar writes this. He says, "The high point of the infancy section is that Jesus introduces himself to the reader for the first time. Jesus declares that he is called to instruct humans because he has a close personal relationship to the Father and has a mission from him to carry out." So, if there's any wonder who Jesus is, he identifies himself in deeply intimate and personal language, not as Mary and Joseph's son, but as the Son of God the Father. Last bit of note here is how this little section ends, where it talks about Jesus growing in wisdom and stature, which is almost word for word a direct line back to 1 Samuel chapter 2 and how Samuel gets described when he is a boy growing up in the temple as well. And so we've had a number of these links back to Hannah and Hannah's story through Mary's song and the responses that people give to Jesus. And now we have a direct, almost word for word link about how Samuel, who grows up to be this judge and incredible prophet and godly leader of the people of Israel, is sort of portrayed in Jesus, that Jesus is the new and better Samuel. Luke and the gospel writers often have these hyperlinks back to these characters, whether it's Abraham or David or Moses, and here particularly to Hannah and Samuel, who are portrayed and considered as these faithful, godly men and women who waited on the Lord, who served him, and who wholeheartedly were filled with his Spirit and led others to the knowledge of God. And so Jesus is purposely described in these same terms that Samuel is. And again, that lets us, the reader, know that Jesus isn't just some mere child or even some kind of just prodigy, but he is the fulfillment of God's promises. He's much like all of these ancient heroes of old, but as we'll see through the course of the gospel, he's much more than just that. And as we see in this whole part of Jesus being someone who both amazes and perplexes people, someone who calls for a response, and who tells us, whether it's with his own words or in Luke's words himself, that Jesus is more than he seems, that he is God's son, he's the fulfillment of ancient prophecy, and he is like these biblical heroes of old, but something more. So all of this is packed into these two short chapters where Luke is setting us up to think about who Jesus really is. And as we jump into his adult life in the coming chapters, we're meant to have those thoughts and ideas about Jesus in the back of our mind. And as we proceed through the gospel, like Luke does here, we're meant to consider what is our response to Jesus. As C.S. Lewis once famously said, Jesus is either a liar, a lunatic, or he is Lord. There's no sort of in between. He was a liar. He was just a guy who was making it all up, and we shouldn't listen to him or pay attention to him. He was a lunatic, meaning that he believed the things that he said and did, but really he was just mentally unwell, or that he actually is Lord. And Luke has us considering that question as he presents Jesus to us in this way. And so what is your response to Jesus? This is what we are meant to meditate on and consider as we jump into Jesus's adult life in ministry. So I'll leave you with those thoughts. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time. Bye.